listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with The Briefing. As another summer approaches, Australia is living up to its international reputation for alarming wildlife in unexpected places.
The 7-year-old was packing up her school bag for the day and peered into her lunchbox. Inside, not only an Australian lunchbox favourite, Le Snack, but also Le Snake. A red-bellied black snake.
There you go.
How long would it be?
Probably about a metre, a little bit over a metre. But imagine that, hey? In your couch. In the recliner.
Yes, it's getting into snake season across most of the country. So this episode, we're bringing you everything you need to know about danger noodles, including where you're most likely to spot one in daily life and what to do if you or your pet gets bitten. Mark Pelley, the snake hunter, has decades of experience handling snakes and recently had his own life-threatening encounter. Mark, welcome to The Briefing. Are there more snakes around than usual right now?
Actually, yes. So snake numbers are actually increasing in Melbourne. And so Melbourne's pretty much a suburban town. And in suburbs, you've got plenty of houses. And each house has got a water supply, a place for a snake to hide. And where you've got people, you've got rubbish. Where you've got rubbish, you've got mice. And when you've got mice, along come the snakes. And particularly brown snakes have actually found a way to learn and adapt and cope with the increased human activity with the houses. So brown snakes are actually increasing in number particularly.
And that's in Melbourne. What about elsewhere in the country?
Around Australia, you've got interesting dynamics between how snakes will interact with the human sprawl. Some snakes, such as taipans, are extremely shy and they'll move away. But a lot of snakes in Australia have just learned to adapt. People like to plant trees in their house. People get rodents or possums go into their house and their roofs, particularly up north in Queensland. And so the big pythons in Queensland will crawl in and start to use roof cavities to live. Venomous snakes will find different places on the ground. They live under the concrete or underneath some of our building structures, and they live there instead of in the grass where they used to.
If you spot a snake, where's the most likely place that you might find it?
In and around your home, actually, because most people don't actually realise they're there. We go to work, we're in an office building, we're on a construction site, whatever we do with ourselves, and snakes are crawling around our homes all the time. And we just don't realise it until one day we come home and all of a sudden there's a snake and people go, oh my God, there's suddenly a snake here. What people don't realise is that the snakes have actually learned to live among us. So if we have a set routine, for example, let's say you get up every morning at 7 o'clock and you're in the office by 8 o'clock and you come home at 4 o'clock, what the snake will do is about 5 minutes before you leave, it'll be outside. And then it'll suddenly disappear. It doesn't have a watch on it, but it just knows your routine. Then during the day when you're at work, it crawls around your house eating mice. And then about 5 minutes before you come home, it'll go disappear again. They actually do this. They learn to work with you. And then one day you get a day off and all of a sudden you're hanging out the washing, you look down and you look at the snake and go, what are you doing here? And the snake looks at you. What are you doing here?
This is all very alarming, Mark, I will say. Why are there so many snakes around right now?
Welcome to Australia is, I guess, the first answer to that one. We have more snake species than everywhere in the world. It's the ideal environment for snakes. But the reason there are more around at the moment is because it's basically the weather is warming up, particularly in the southern states of Australia. The weather's warming up. So in the winter period, particularly in the cold parts of Australia, the snakes go into something called brumation, which is basically their version of hibernation. They just do nothing for like 3 months. They might need some water, but they do nothing. Now they're coming out to mate. In the northern suburbs, basically, it's warm all year round, but they're particularly active with the warm weather. They mate, they need to eat, they need to drink, and they need to escape the heat as well. So snakes regulate their life depending on heat cycles and depending on the temperature. So that's why we see a lot more of them, because they have to move and they can't hide as much as they do in the winter period.
You actually were bitten by a tiger snake. Tell us what happened.
Sure. I advise against it, number one. But basically, I got called out to any other job in Diamond Creek, which is where I'm from in Melbourne. And I caught the snake, and unfortunately, what I have is called a pinning stick, and it broke at the time. And so the snake had free access to my hand, and it bit me straight on my finger, on the vein there. So the venom went straight into my veins. Within about 10 minutes, I was out cold. The venom basically went straight to my system and affected me straight away. The ambulance was called. But before then, I actually managed to make my way home because I was only around the corner from my house, and I collapsed in my front garden, and my family and friends were there to see me basically stop breathing. Went to hospital, and in hospital I was treated, and with a lot of complications, eventually I managed to walk out.
That's incredibly scary.
It was actually, and it might sound like a strange thing to say, I realized what was happening to me, and I've kind of prepared myself for it my whole life. The only part for me that I worried about was the fact that I've got daughters and I'm a single dad, and no one's going to look after them if something happened to me. So that was my biggest fear, but also my biggest motivation to fight through and to get better again.
If you had your time again, would it be calling 000 first?
So what actually happened was when I got bitten by the snake, I finished capturing the snake. Then I called 000 as I made my way to the car.
Right.
And because I realized the venom got me straight into the vein, I realized I don't have time here. I need to get to people who knew how to do first aid because I knew I was going to stop breathing or collapse very soon. Because I was so close to home, normally I don't recommend to do this, but because so close to home, at home I had my daughter and 2 other people trained in first aid specific for snake bites that I knew were very good at CPR who could keep me alive. That's why I made that clinical decision at the time to go there. Otherwise, if you're bitten by a snake, definitely call 000, follow their advice, and stay still.
What did it feel like when you were actually bitten?
You don't feel the fangs because the fangs are very small. But if you ever put your hand on a hot oven and you pull away because you feel that burning sensation, it feels exactly like that, except you can't pull your hand away because the venom burns as it goes into you, and it burns and it stings and it really, really hurts. It's like my bones were on fire.
Have you ever been bitten by any snake before?
No, I had a close call with a brown snake, but in terms of an actual proper snake bite, that was the first time it happened to me since basically my entire life of catching snakes.
And you've been catching snakes since you were a kid, basically?
Well, when I was a kid, I was born in Australia. I was raised between Australia and overseas. When I came back to live in Australia full-time around, 7 years old, I used to pick up tiger and brown snakes as a small child, not knowing they were venomous. And then it wasn't until later on I realised they were venomous, so I let it go, and then I did it professionally from 2012 till now.
Tiger snakes, where do they rank in most dangerous, least dangerous snakes?
They are the 5th most venomous snake in the world. They have very powerful neurotoxins which shut down your brain, myotoxins which can affect your muscles, and they also have interesting aspects of their venom which affects your blood cells, your red blood cells and your white blood cells. But also, it affects your clotting. And one of the things that happened to me in hospital was I actually got cut in hospital and I started to bleed out, and I needed many, many bags of blood in order to survive. So that's why they're so dangerous, because they affect your system in so many ways.
Listening to this, given that what you're saying is that there's snakes roaming in and out of our houses when we're not looking, one thing that might be particularly worrying for people is what happens with their pets. What happens if you come home and you see your dog suffering, or, I don't know, what does it look like when a snake bites a dog?
That's a really good question. So the first symptoms of a snake bite in a dog are the pupils dilate, they get really big, the dog starts drooling a lot, and they vomit and have diarrhea. Later symptoms include blood in the urine, stiff muscles like paralysis, coma, convulsions, and of course death. The problem we have with dogs is we're smart enough to stay away from snakes, which is why there's not many snake bites in Australia. It still happens. But dogs investigate the world through their nose. And the dog will see a snake and go, oh my God, what is this fantastic moving, smelling thing in my garden? They'll put their nose into a snake's face and get bitten. If you're not there to witness it at that moment, your dog's in serious trouble because they often die within about an hour.
You said that it's relatively rare for people to actually get bitten by a snake in Australia. When they do, other than being a snake handler, how does that usually happen?
Well, they actually did a very interesting study on this in 2017. There was a big article in the Herald Sun with the title, Middle-Aged Men Dead from Snake Bites. And there was a photo of me, now this is about 8 years ago, a photo of me holding a tiger snake. So there were 2 problems with this article. Number 1, it was 8 years ago. What do you mean middle-aged? And number 2, no one read the article and they all thought that I was dead from a snake bite. But what it actually talked about was the people who are most likely to get bitten by snakes were a particular kind of person. Men over the age of 40, in and around their own home after 4 p.m. Guess what they were doing?
What?
Trying to pick up, handle or kill a snake. In other words, most snake bites in Australia would not happen if people just left them alone and called their closest snake catcher.
So if I'm a middle-aged man and I try and pick up a snake and get bitten, what are my chances of survival?
If you do the right thing, you got a good chance of survival. The reason I went to my house, like I said, was because I knew I got envenomated in the circulatory system. But typically, the venom spreads through your lymphatic system. The venom goes through your muscles. And if you just stop, move away from the snake, call 000, apply what's called a pressure immobilization bandage, which is basically a bandage up the entire affected limb from the extremity to the top. So if you've got bitten in your hand, you go from your fingernails to your shoulder, for example, and you lay dead still till the ambulance comes. You've got many hours before the venom can even get to your organs, so you've got a really good chance of survival. If you don't have treatment, you don't have much of a chance of survival, particularly with some of Australia's snakes.
Just back to your particular incident with this tiger snake, what's the recovery been like? How long has it taken?
Painful and extensive. So initially, I had to basically survive the bleeding out to death. I had to survive with multiple doses of antivenom. I couldn't walk for quite a few days. Then basically I had a loss of hand-eye coordination. My vision was impaired. I had retrograde amnesia. I couldn't taste. I lost about 8 kilograms of muscle. It was just an awful sensation to go through. I had to do a lot of physical therapy and rehabilitation. I had to do a lot of training. I had to work on so many things. It took months of recovery to get back to close to what I was beforehand.
Overall, what is your main advice when it comes to snakes that you find in your house or elsewhere?
2 pieces of advice. Number 1, if you see a snake, remember most snakes in Australia are really shy and they don't want to bite you unless you harass them. So if you leave them alone, call your closest snake catcher and watch it from a safe distance, your snake will be fine and you'll be fine too. With pets, depending on what state you're from, you can train dogs to avoid snakes. It's something that I do myself. It's like canine snake avoidance training, and you can train dogs to avoid snakes, but not all states let this happen. So if you're in Victoria and WA, you can train your dog to avoid snakes, Tasmania as well. Other states, unfortunately, you can't. So just have really good recall with your dog. So if you do see them encounter a snake, teach them to pull away from it.
Well, this has been as fascinating as it has been alarming. Mark, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Snake handler Mark Pelley there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. We'd love it if you could share this app with someone you think might enjoy it. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6 a.m. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.